Threads of Unknowing is the second full-length album from VoidCeremony, a project that is basically directed by Garrett Johnson, a Ramona, California-based musician who acts as the co-vocalist and guitarist and basically the main composer of this work, which is in the progressive death metal style. And I mean more of an old-school progressive death metal modus and influence that reaches far and wide to touch upon the best of what progressive death metal has had to offer over the course of the last 20 or 30 years. There are no obvious notes of worship here, uh, except that, Damon Good of Stargazer is in this band, and obviously his music has been a big influence on this band in general. But we get the beginnings of the band were much more rooted in kind of an early immolation-esque percussive death metal sound that developed alongside friends and bands from Ascended Dead and Golgotha, among others. So there was not a lot of promise in what they had created by the time Foul Origins of Humanity showed up. I think when I listened to it at first, I was like, I kind of get this, but I don't get the appeal of it because it is a little bit ham-fisted. It wasn't fully there, and it just didn't quite match up with just what was around at the time in 2018. So I didn't really get it when they were signed, and all of a sudden a full length was on its way. They're on $20 spin. Kind of at just the best time to be this type of band on that type of label. So I guess I kind of ate shit and realized, wow, this is a pretty amazing prospect once Entropic Reflections Continuum Dimensional Unravel finally showed up. This was a really impressive group, and I go into it because it was one of the best albums of June that year. It was on my best of 100 of 2020, so this was an album that I actually loved. It was a great record, and in that classic ancient progressive death metal feeling, it's just something that I particularly like. So anyway, they're back with album number 2, and that's a lot to contend with. And what we'll do is we'll get right into a song just so my voice doesn't drone on for too long to start, and see how everything has changed a little bit, but they've still got it there. As much as I will focus on the 2 guitarists, 2 vocalists, and the bassist here in terms of technique and voicing and all that, naturally the drumming from Charlie Corinne is world class, and none of it would really work if his work wasn't what it was. So not to set it aside, but the real appeal of that first record was Damon Good's bass playing and how it excited a lot of the or incited a lot of the activity that made that first record something special. Now, for this second record, they've added Phil Tuga, of a Quebec musician who I know best from Zealotry and a lot of his more technical death metal projects over the years, and more recently, like First Fragment and Worm and all kinds of other bands. So I wasn't sure what his inclusion necessarily amounted to in terms of, is this kind of like a death sort of inclusion where they've maybe included a shredder to elevate the style of the record a bit, or if he was actually co-writing. And so I guess he is a co-guitarist, co-vocalist, and co-songwriter in some respect, adding to certain harmonies, and generally seems to have honed the precision of this record to the point where it is it kind of makes the previous record feel a little bit staggered. It eases away all of these sort of immolation-esque sort of compounded more chromatic statements of the previous record, and now everything moves in a sort of shred happy flow that touches on a little bit of Morbid Angel early on, but eventually does kind of go into that full kind of Stargazer-esque mode, and there are nods to Mithras and the Chasm later on, as far as I could tell, and to the point that I was sort of comparing some of the songs to label mates Enigmatum at some point. But the bigger point is that now more space is being shared between these three musicians on their guitars, and they're all a bit virtuosic in their approach. So the guitars, especially the lead guitars, are mixed at such a volume where you might jump into this record and really feel like the emphasis is so much on the shredding that that's all that there isn't a lot of substance to the experience with such a focus on the shred. Now, I'll admit that's how I felt for the first 5 listens. I was, well, okay, there's another guitar solo. It is quite loud. It is drowning out the rhythm guitars, and even the bass sort of takes a little bit of a backseat to the lead guitars in a lot of ways. But it's an important central voice to this record, and it lends it a little bit more of an alien voice, as the two vocalists have very slight but noticeable differences in what they do, but all of it is said in the background to the point where the guitar work really is not only the flair but the focus and the central voice of the record. Now, we do get a little bit less activity from the bass performances this time around in terms of the upfront register of it, but it does, after the first couple of songs, his voicing gets a bit stronger. It starts to blend with the whole. They all start to work together a little bit better after a few songs. So it does seem shred forward. It does seem a little wanky to start, but all this arrives with a purpose, and it helps to pack a lot more detail into a relatively short album that is meant to be effective and evocative and immediate in a lot of ways. It is short enough to where you could kind of buzz through it, obviously just a couple times an hour and still miss quite a lot of details. Now, for my taste, it's a little bit too focused on the solos and less on the displaying some of the lyricism and the meaning behind what they're doing. As you pick through the vinyl and look at all the pictures, there's obviously like an intense narrative happening, and a lot of that is sort of in the background to the performative aspect of it. And I know this is much in the tradition of early 90s or even late 90s progressive death metal. And it's something that fans of like Anata and those kind of groups will appreciate right away. So this is in such a good tradition that it's hard to fault that there's some loud shred on the record every couple of minutes. But most of it seems to fit the mood of the song. Not all of it does, but that's not all that's firing off. Everyone is showing off a little bit of ingenuity or something extra, from drum fills to synth interludes to extra guitar solos here, there, and everywhere. So it's there's a fusion-esque feeling of it, and I mean actual jazz fusion where everyone is moving together in such a way that it becomes playful. And I don't mean that in like a cute way, it is death metal, but there's a slickness to it that is just above and beyond anything they'd done prior. And I think that's what really had impressed me, is that this is a very intentional step up. It is a very detailed and engrossing experience. It just blows by so fast that I couldn't help but leave it on repeat. So, yeah, I mean, if you're as much of a geek for this kind of music, then I think your recommendation will probably line up with mine. This is just a little bit higher than my recommendation for the previous album. I think it is clear that this is of a higher quality in terms of performance. And the rest will be up to you, whether you feel like there's a little bit too much emphasis on the sort of shred guitar performative value versus the intense contemplative feeling that you'd want to get from a progressive death metal album in this style. So see where that works out for you. Check out the record for quite a lot more detail, and check it out.